It ended before most people understood it had begun. Those who were present did not cheer, they did not shout, they stood still, trying to reconcile what they had just seen. The larger man did not fall dramatically. He simply stopped advancing. No rules were announced. No techniques were named. There was no visible anger, no celebration afterward. Only one man remained relaxed, breathing evenly, already turning away. The outcome was clear, long before the method could be explained. Years later, witnesses would still struggle to describe how it happened. They agreed on only one thing. After those few seconds, the room understood authority differently. Stop! The room was not designed to impress. It did not need to. It was a working space. Wooden floors worn smooth by repetition, air heavy with heat and restraint. The walls had absorbed years of impact, not just from fists or feet, but from presence. This was Hong Kong in the early 1970s, a time when martial reputation was not negotiated through interviews or headlines. It was understood through proximity. People came here knowing what silence meant. Training halls like this were not neutral ground. They carried memory. Who had stood there before? Who had failed? Who had been corrected without ceremony? In these rooms, skill revealed itself quickly because there was nowhere to hide it. At the center of this particular space was Bruce Lee. Though he did not position himself as a center, he rarely did. He moved as someone who did not need acknowledgement to function. Those who trained around him noticed the absence of excess. No wasted motion, no raised voice, no effort to dominate the room through posture alone. Authority here was not claimed, it was assumed. This era rewarded a specific kind of clarity. Martial artists crossed paths frequently, on sets, in gyms, through mutual acquaintances. Strength was respected, but it was not decisive on its own. Many men were strong. Fewer were precise. Fewer still could remain calm when tested without warning. The room reflected that hierarchy. Observers did not speak much. They leaned against walls, arms crossed, watching without anticipation. They were not waiting for a fight. They were waiting for information. In this culture, confrontation was not entertainment, it was calibration. Bruce Lee understood that environment intimately. He had moved through many like it, some welcoming, others skeptical. His reputation preceded him, but reputation here was provisional. It lasted only until contradicted. What distinguished him was not mystery, but consistency. He trained the same way whether alone or observed. There was no performance layer. Those present later recalled how unremarkable he seemed at first glance, smaller than expected, relaxed, almost disengaged. That misreading happened often. Nearby, the atmosphere shifted subtly as another presence entered the periphery of attention. Not announced, not introduced, just noticed. A man whose physicality was impossible to ignore. Broad shoulders, dense muscle, a body shaped by discipline of a different kind. This was Bolo Yeung, already known among fighters and film crews alike. His size carried its own language. People adjusted their stance unconsciously when he moved through a room. Space reorganized itself around him. Two forms of authority now occupied the same environment. No one suggested what should happen next. No challenge was declared, but the room understood that something had shifted. In places like this, moments did not need invitations. They arrived when conditions were complete, and now, quietly, they were. Reputation entered the room before words ever could. Bolo Yeung did not announce himself, but his body did the work for him. Years of disciplined weight training had carved him into something unmistakable. Thick arms hung heavy at his sides. His chest rose slowly, deliberately. He carried himself as someone accustomed to being measured visually and usually found superior. In many rooms, that would have been enough. People adjusted without realizing it. A half step backward, a pause in conversation, eyes tracking his movement. Strength like that imposed a kind of gravity. It suggested inevitability. If things turned physical, the outcome seemed pre-written. But this room had already made its adjustment earlier. Across the floor, Bruce Lee did not mirror the tension. He did not square his shoulders or signal readiness. He remained where he was, posture loose, attention present, but unforced. To an unfamiliar observer, it might have looked like indifference. Those who knew better recognized restraint. The contrast was immediate and unsettling. One man represented visible dominance, mass, density, intimidation refined through appearance. The other represented something harder to categorize, efficiency without display, control without stiffness. No challenge was spoken, but expectation formed anyway. In this era, reputations often collided indirectly. A raised eyebrow, a prolonged look, a subtle test of boundaries. Men measured one another without formal agreement, each reading the other's willingness to escalate. Bolo's presence invited comparison. His physique asked a question the room had seen answered many times before. What happens when size decides to move forward? Bruce Lee did not answer immediately. He observed. Not Bolo's muscles, but his balance, the way his weight settled into the floor, the rhythm of his breathing, small things most people overlooked when distracted by scale. This was not disrespect. It was assessment. Witnesses later recalled that the tension did not feel hostile. It felt procedural, as if both men understood that something needed clarification, not for ego, but for order. When two authorities occupy the same space, hierarchy must resolve itself. Still, Bruce Lee did not rush that resolution. He shifted his stance slightly, not to prepare, but to remain comfortable. A subtle adjustment that signaled readiness without commitment. His hands stayed relaxed. His gaze remained level. Bolo noticed that was when the imbalance of expectations became visible. Size had always drawn reaction. Here it met stillness, not fear, not defiance, just absence of concession. The room quieted further. Observers sensed that whatever followed would not be loud, it would not be dramatic, it would be brief, or not happen at all. That uncertainty weighed heavier than any threat. Two reputations now faced each other, not through words, but through presence alone. And for the first time since Bolo had entered, the advantage was no longer obvious. No one called for attention, yet attention gathered. People who had been training slowed their movements. Conversations faded without being finished. The sound of feet on wood softened, then stopped. What replaced it was not anticipation, but awareness, a collective recognition that something was aligning. In rooms like this, silence was never empty. It was evaluative. The observers did not crowd closer. They stayed where they were, respecting an invisible boundary that had formed between the two men. This was not a ring. There were no ropes, no corners, just space, unclaimed, waiting. Word had already moved quietly through the building, not as rumor but as instinct. People sensed when a moment mattered. They came not to witness a fight, but to confirm what they already suspected might occur. Bruce Lee remained still, his posture unchanged. He did not scan the room or acknowledge the growing audience. His attention stayed narrow, directed only at the man in front of him. This was not tunnel vision, it was exclusion, everything unnecessary removed. Across from him, Bolo Yeung stood grounded, his presence now sharpened by scrutiny. Being watched altered the equation. Size performed differently under observation. What had once been natural now carried expectation. The room began to lean inward psychologically, if not physically. No one spoke because no one needed to. Everyone understood that once movement started, it would resolve itself quickly. Prolonged exchanges belonged to demonstrations, not corrections. This was neither scheduled nor ceremonial. It was a test of alignment. Bolo shifted his weight forward slightly. Not an attack, a probe, a signal that he was prepared to engage if required. His body language suggested confidence built on certainty, certainty that mass and power would dictate the terms. Bruce Lee did not mirror the shift. Instead, he exhaled slowly. A small thing, almost invisible. But in that exhale was information. He was not bracing. He was not tightening. He was allowing gravity to settle, letting his structure do the work. Those watching felt the change before they understood it. The tension sharpened, not because of aggression, but because of contrast. One man prepared to impose, the other prepared to receive and redirect. Time stretched in an unusual way. Seconds felt longer because nothing happened. No feints, no verbal escalation. Just two figures occupying the same space, each representing a different philosophy of control. For some observers, doubt crept in. They wondered if this moment would dissolve on its own, if restraint would override curiosity, if the room would simply return to its rhythm. But moments like this rarely dissolve, they conclude. And the conclusion, when it came, would be so brief that many would later question whether they had truly seen it, or only its aftermath. Those closest to the space would later disagree on the exact sequence. Some said it began with a step. Others remembered a shift of the hips. A few insisted it was over, before either man appeared to move at all. What they agreed on was this. The moment did not announce itself. There was no wind-up, no dramatic entry, no visible exchange of blows. The larger man advanced with intent, controlled, confident, expecting resistance to meet force. That expectation shaped his timing. It was the only opening required. Bruce Lee did not retreat. He did not brace. He entered the space before it fully formed. His movement was short, almost dismissive in appearance. Not fast in the way people describe speed, but early. He occupied the moment ahead of the action. Witnesses struggled to describe what happened next because it did not resemble a conventional technique. There was no flourish to anchor memory, just a disruption. Balance broken at the root. Structure compromised before power could express itself. Bolo's forward pressure met emptiness where resistance should have been. His mass continued moving, but his alignment did not. The correction was immediate and contained. A brief contact, a subtle redirection, enough to send information through the body faster than thought could catch up. The effect was not violent, but decisive. The advance stopped, not because pain demanded it, but because continuation no longer made sense. The room felt it before it saw it. A sudden absence of tension, like a held breath released without permission. The larger man stood still, feet planted, but uncertain, posture no longer unified. Bruce Lee had already disengaged. He did not follow. He did not press advantage. He simply stepped away, as if the exchange had concluded exactly as intended. His breathing remained even, his expression unchanged. The demonstration was complete. There was no triumph in his posture, no acknowledgment of witnesses. He did not look back to confirm the effect. He trusted it. The lesson had landed where it needed to. Those watching understood something important in that restraint. The point had not been to dominate physically, but to clarify hierarchy without escalation, to show that force, when misaligned, defeats itself. Bolo did not fall. He did not lash out. He adjusted his stance slowly, recalibrating in real time. His face revealed neither anger nor embarrassment, only recognition. In that recognition, the confrontation ended. No one spoke, no one moved, because nothing more was required. The moment did not echo. It settled. What followed was not reaction, but processing. The room remained still, as if movement itself would be inappropriate. No one rushed forward. No one checked on anyone else. The absence of urgency said more than applause ever could. Bolo Yeung stood where he was, shoulders no longer squared for advance. His breathing had changed, not labored, but reconsidered. The confidence that had entered the room with him had not been shattered. It had been revised. He did not look around to gauge the audience. He did not search for validation or excuse. His attention stayed inward, recalibrating what had just occurred. For a man accustomed to certainty through physical dominance, this pause carried weight. Nothing about the exchange had humiliated him. That was important. Across the space, Bruce Lee had already returned to stillness, not a defensive stillness, but neutrality. He did not posture. He did not claim the room. He allowed it to remain what it had been before, just a place of practice. This restraint completed the lesson. Observers later noted how easily the situation could have escalated, how a follow-up strike, a sharp word, or even a look of superiority might have turned correction into conflict. None of that happened. Instead, Bruce Lee treated the outcome as expected, not inevitable, but resolved. He gave Bolo space, not as mercy, but as respect, the kind that acknowledges effort without rewarding miscalculation. Bolo understood that distinction. He adjusted his stance fully now, grounding himself again. The tension in his frame dissolved into composure. When he finally looked up, it was not toward the audience, but toward Bruce Lee. There was no challenge in his expression, only acknowledgment, a silent one. The room absorbed that exchange quietly. People did not rush to reinterpret what they had seen. They did not debate techniques or speculate on outcomes. They understood that what mattered had already passed. Hierarchy had been clarified without spectacle. In environments like this, that clarity traveled faster than stories. It reshaped behavior. Conversation shifted. Training resumed, but with a subtle recalibration of attention. People moved differently around the space now, not out of fear, out of understanding. The confrontation had ended without a winner being declared. Yet everyone present knew who had controlled the moment and why it would not need repeating. The incident was never formally recorded. No footage surfaced. No official account was published. It survived the way many defining moments do, through repetition that resisted embellishment. Those who spoke about it did so carefully, often lowering their voices as if volume might distort what had happened. Details varied, interpretation shifted, but the conclusion remained stable. Something had been settled. In the years that followed, Bruce Lee continued on a trajectory already in motion. His influence expanded beyond training halls into film, philosophy, and a broader cultural vocabulary. Yet those closest to him noticed that he rarely referenced moments like this one, not out of secrecy, out of irrelevance. For him, the exchange had not been an achievement. It had been a confirmation of timing, of alignment, of restraint working as intended. It required no preservation beyond its effect on those who witnessed it. Bolo Yeung carried the moment differently. He did not deny it, nor did he dramatize it. Over time, his presence in martial arts cinema and training circles evolved. Those who trained with him later remarked on a subtle shift, greater attention to balance, to structure, to control beyond strength. The lesson had not diminished him. It had refined him. Among practitioners, the story became a reference point rather than a boast. It was invoked quietly when discussions turned to effectiveness, to the difference between looking powerful and being decisive, to why economy of motion outlasts excess. Years passed. New generations entered training halls that no longer resembled that original room. The floors changed, the walls were repainted, but the story persisted, carried by instructors who had heard it from those who had been there. They never framed it as a victory. They framed it as an example, a reminder that authority does not announce itself, that mastery does not seek witnesses, that the most enduring demonstrations are the ones that end without continuation. And so, the moment remained, unfixed in time, resistant to exaggeration, not a spectacle but a quiet calibration of reality. Those who understood it did not speak often about what happened in those seconds. They spoke about what never needed to happen again,